Neil?
Awesome, thank you.
The link is in the agenda for the notes thing, both our agenda and the IETF. And again, just the high points and especially the decisions made would be very helpful.
Or discussion at the mic.
Thank you, Zuho. Okay,
Let's go.
all right, let's get started. This is the HTTP working group. This is the note well on the screen. It's fairly fuzzy, but hopefully you're familiar with it by now. These are the terms under which we participate in the IETF. Regarding everything from intellectual property, which is very important for some reasons. Also, competition law, which is also important for other reasons. And your behavior, which is very important. And we do take all of those things seriously. So if you're not familiar with this, please do take a look. The best thing to do is to go to your favorite internet search engine, or no, not LLM, just search engine, and ask for IETF Note Well. And that will give you this information. I'm now know what I'm doing after this session.
Yeah.
Our agenda today, we have two sessions. Today we have 1 hour, and then on Friday we have 2 hours. So today we have what we're doing now, which is scribe selection. Thank you very much, Neil. We just did the note well. Blue sheets don't exist anymore, but you do need to scan that QR code over there so that we know that you were participating. And that's actually how you raise your hand virtually using the tool that you will get from following that QR code so that you can go and speak to the microphone. It's a little more complex, but it's more equitable and reliable. So there you go. Our agenda for today, we're talking about 4 different things. First of all, an update on the cookies draft effort. We then have unprompted authentication from David Skenazy. Note I'm still not using the name that you used for that draft, and maybe we'll talk about that. We'll talk for just very briefly about the query method, and then we'll finish up with talking about resumable uploads. Do we have any agenda bashing? Any changes to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there should be a pink box. Is it an X? Oh, okay.
So I should be on the X?
Yeah.
Oh, be on the yeah. Oh no, don't. Oh, I don't know.
No?
Fine. Yeah, you should be right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go ahead and get started with cookies. Can you take over or should I?
We don't have slides, so if you
Oh, we don't. That's right. We were going to do this from the issues.
list.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
do something a little bit more free form.
That's right.
Let's do it. All right.
Just bring up my
And
own
I
talking
just
points
need to
here.
select the.
Yeah, so you want to 665bis and then minus defer. Because there are quite a few deferred issues.
Indeed. I'm going to try and make this. Maybe if I make it bigger, it'll be higher resolution. Let's find out.
Let me get this up in the meantime. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Bingler. I'm one of the I'm one of the editors on the cookie spec, which at lunch today, I was looking up the first draft of the spec was published October of 2016. So we are coming up on its 8th birthday in October. Almost. So hoping to get it published before it turns 8, but we'll see what happens. So anyone who was paying attention these last couple of times noticed that the cookie spec had sort of stalled for a while because of one particular issue, which I've kind of termed the same site redirect chain. Quick rehash on that for anyone who's unfamiliar. There was a bug on the initial same site specification where if you redirected from site A to site B and then back to site A, we never considered that little middle jump to site B, and we'd say, okay, that entire request was same site. Well, that's not same site, so we went back and fixed the bug. Chrome implemented it, Firefox implemented it. We both turned it on, and Chrome at least started receiving bug reports within a couple days, and we had to turn it back off. Firefox also had to turn it off because it's just breaking sites. So the spec stalled for a little bit as I was looking into how we can sort of mitigate this while still keeping the security protections. As you can see, the issue is no longer up there, and my solution was reverting the language so we no longer consider the same site redirect change. That's not great, but in the interest of getting the spec moving and getting the other positive changes out there, I think it was probably worthwhile. And the reintegrating the same site redirect chain is already planned for our RFC 6265 BIS.
Sure.
So that was the last major remaining major issue. There were a number of smaller issues that which I either resolved or deferred until next time. I know that there's a lot of deferred issues, but like I said, BIS is coming up. So the remaining issues are fairly small. There's a summary of changes from the original 6265, which I haven't started yet, but we'll get on pretty soon. And then recently, IANA emailed us and let us know that our IANA section was out of date, so that needs to be updated. But once those are closed, I'm going to, I think we're probably ready for working group last call. I don't know what the chairs think.
I mean, I'd be willing to start it even sooner than that if yeah. If you want to publish a draft with a current set of, I should eat the mic, with a current set of changes in it, and then, this is roughly editorial work, I think, because my inclination on this would be, because it's been out there for so long, and because it is such a complex and important specification, the working group last call should be a substantial one. On the order of, well, I'd say at least 4 weeks, I'd say. Yeah.
Okay, I was worried you were going to say like a year.
Well, on the big scheme of things, it's,
Okay, yeah, great.
Great.
That sounds good to me.
all right.
Let's see. Make sure I'm not forgetting anything here. No, that's it for the cookie spec. Any
Oh.
questions? Would love
Anything
to.
on the, I need you to watch the queue because I can't. Oh, it'll come up there. Okay. So, and you mentioned BIS ter next steps, whatever that's we're going to call about that. This has been talked about in the community for a little while now. I know I think it was Anna Van Kesteren was talking about relayering the cookie spec, and I think that's the next discussion for the community. Whether that happens, if that all happens here in the working group, or whether there are other venues that it might be good to coordinate with, that's all TBD. But we were talking, I know, on the side about the possibility of, keeping this specification more of a heartbeat where it's continually evolving.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's there's a lot in the future plan for cookies, and so having smaller, more regular updates is probably a good decision.
Yeah, and hopefully less painful in getting those iterations out.
Yeah.
We would hope. Yeah. Great. Any other discussion? Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, thanks all.
Great progress. I'm very happy to see that. Next up, David, unprompted authentication.
Do you want to share your slides or
Can you do it?
Do I need to?
you need to stop.
Okay.
All the slot for me. Typo.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm David Skenazy, and I'm here to talk about the HTTP signature authentication scheme, formerly known as unprompted authentication. I'm awake, I swear. All right, next slide. So if this is news to anyone, very quick summary. So the idea here is that we want the client to authenticate to the server using asymmetric keys, and we want the server to be able to hide the fact that it serves these authenticated resources. So the way we designed this, we used a TLS key exporter, adopted this a while back, had some churn, figured some things out, and pretty much kind of got decisions for outcomes on all the open issues back in Prague. Next slide. So since then, we decided the spec had finally stabilized. We decided to interop. So the folks over at the Guardian project did really cool work, built 2 implementations, one in Java, that's a client and a server, and one that's a plugin for Nginx. And then François Michel, who's the author of SH3, wrote one in Go, and I built one used in Google's Quiche C++. And then we tried interrupt, and it worked. The only ones that didn't work was that the Java implementation only supports HTTP 1 and 2, and mine only supports HTTP 3, and we haven't figured out how to make those interoperate yet. Though if we put that one as an intermediary, we might be able to do it. So that was great. Like implementation, no like serious issues were found in the spec. Quite a few editorial things to clarify and improve were found. And also we have a security analysis in Tamarin from Jonathan Hoyland. Yeah, so we're in good shape. Next slide, please. But of course I was here, okay, we're done. And then people got excited. Oh, we have a question. Mohammed.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, Sama from TU Dresden. So, can you say a bit more about the formal analysis? Like, what exactly was the model? What were the kind of main features that you modeled? And what was the kind of property that you verified, just to get some intuition about what exactly is verified here?
Jonathan, can you take that one? As he looks surprised.
Wow. I feel like this is more of a question to ask at UFMRG. Sorry, plugging my own BOF. Not BOF, research group. It's a thing. Yeah, so basically I just proved the authentication properties because this doesn't really have any other properties. And I was proving how it binds to TLS. The model assumes that TLS is secure and doesn't try and reprove TLS because I have better things to do with my time. So yeah, it just says, assuming TLS is secure, does this provide correct auth or strong auth if you're looking at the low hierarchy of authentication?
So maybe I can rephrase my question. I mean, if you assume TLS to be already correct, what was the need for the formal verification in the first place? So what triggered this formal analysis? Can you say a few?
So
maybe-
HTTP auth is different from TLS. HTTP auth says, so TLS, the client authenticates potentially with a certificate, but this doesn't have to be the same certificate, right? You could have a completely different identity at the HTTP layer if you so felt, if you so chose. So this would be a, can I have a second identity and prove that the second identity and the first identity are controlled by the same actor?
Okay, right. Thanks. And is the repo available? Is it in the repo already? Can you point the link in the chat maybe?
I can put the link in the chat.
Right. Thanks.
Awesome. So one thing we noticed when we first built this, the initial two use cases we had didn't care about intermediaries, but this is HTTP. We all care about intermediaries. So what we said is, here's how you would build this with intermediaries. You would want to take the key exporter for the intermediary and send it to the upstream HTTP server. But how you do that, we just left it as an exercise to the reader. We had two implementers who were actually interested in building that part. So we said, well, then maybe let's just define a header that says, hey, here's how you send the exporter. It's dirt simple. It uses structured fields because we all love structured fields. And that's kind of all there is to it. I have a PR. The PR needs a bit more editorial work to really like tighten up all the things, but it's just that idea. I figured it made sense to do this since there was interest. I just wanted to run it by the group in case someone would object to the idea of defining a header for this. There's of course a bunch of musts. So like you obviously don't accept this unless it's coming from a trusted intermediary and all that, because like you lose the properties otherwise.
It's very similar to the client cert
Yeah.
things that we had earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well.
Did someone just boo?
I said,
Oh, ooh, yeah, I get you. Yeah, I get you.
Okay, so I disagree that it's similar to client cert because in the client cert draft, you're sending the certificate itself and telling the origin that, yes, I've verified this client cert is legitimate and is held by the client. In this case, I think you're taking the thing that the server, as far as the client is concerned, that the server knows and is secret and nobody else is supposed to know, and sharing it with somebody else so that they can do the verification that the intermediary would have done, has done, whichever.
All right, without going into the detail of
No,
how
okay,
it compares
no,
to something else.
okay. I'm
Oh?
I'm a little cautious about exporting that if that's the case. Does this give you the information you would need to then falsify a token if it were looped around?
No.
Okay.
No, it really doesn't, because it's just the exporter.
Okay.
And you still need the signature off of part of the exporter.
Mhm.
And well, so just to be clear, if the intermediary was compromised, they could replay things, but you're with all those things, you're assuming that the origin trusts the, the backend trusts the intermediary, and with that, it cannot you can't reuse it on different things.
Yeah. If the origin trusts the intermediary, they could just tell you what identity was proved, though.
Yes, and the request was that people don't keep the database of public keys and users on the intermediary. They want to keep it on the back end.
Martin.
Yeah, this gives me the squeeblies too. So you've got the intermediary validating the signature, presumably.
No.
No.
So the client.
Why can't they do that? Don't they don't have the public key at all?
That's right.
Hmm.
Because otherwise, all you need to do is you do the entire protocol between the client and the intermediary turns around and says,
Yeah, I still don't like it. For all the reasons that the client cert thing was awkward, this one essentially removes the purely informational nature of that signal, which was, I validated a certificate, and here's the certificate that I validated. That's one thing. This is, please validate this, but you've got no means of knowing that this byte sequence hasn't been transplanted from somewhere else.
just like you don't have any means of knowing that this certificate it's sending wasn't transplanted from something else.
Well, exactly. You're just making my point for me.
Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of the property of something like this, is that the intermediary has the TLS private keys for the domain. Like you're trusting it to some extent.
Can you do mask?
Jonathan.
So to directly address both those points, the security assumption here is that the exporter context, the exporter key, which has a context string injected into it, is a channel binding, and therefore you can publish this completely without damaging any security. The one thing I think I pointed out to Dave is that if your TLS connection between the client and the intermediary is broken, you're toast. But at that point, you have way bigger issues. Like your TLS private keys have been leaked.
So I think this is a property of any system where you want the backend to be able to determine the authentication with something that it happens between the client and the intermediary. So that's true of client certs, that's true of this. And the only way you can possibly do that is by trusting the intermediary. I think you could probably prove this property. Unless you do a three-part thing, which no.
Yeah. You do an MLS group between the client, the intermediary, and
this is just a practical solution to this, honestly. It's there, but if you don't trust your intermediary, don't do anything with an intermediary. All right.
I was next speaking personally. I personally tend to agree with you, and what I'm concerned more here is just things like injection attacks of traffic being forwarded and the header not being properly cleansed so that someone else can claim control of it. In theory, that's simple. In practice, operationally, that's sometimes very difficult.
Yeah.
So, and Tommy.
All right. And then my comment, which I kept going further back in line because it is taking us in a different direction. I have some foresight that we have some bike sheds coming up, and about
They don't even know what's
about naming. And so I just, when we're talking about a new header here, this particular header that you're proposing does seem somewhat generic. Like, to what degree is this header bound to your off scheme name?
So
imagining
the
it-
next slide will discuss renaming the auth scheme, and if we rename that, we will rename this too. Absolutely.
Just a quick question. You struck out header there. Is that purposeful? Could this be a trailer too?
Oh, sorry. What I meant is define a new header. Oh no, field.
But sometimes no, never mind.
I was just trolling you, Mark, and it worked.
But I troll other. Never mind.
That's intermediary. You forward the trolling. All right. Thanks. Okay. So thanks, Justin, for pointing out that we hit a name collision. And what really drove the point home for me is I went to go check something in my draft. So I used my favorite search engine, by which I mean the one that pays my mortgage, and typed in the name of the draft, and then the other one came up. And I was like, damn, I think Justin has a point. So anyway, there was this draft Cabbage HTTP signatures that was replaced and eventually went into what became RFC 9421. It used an HTTP auth scheme called signature. 9421 doesn't use that anymore, but that draft got implemented and deployed. So that value is still kind of used out there, and collisions are bad. We've implemented this, we haven't deployed yet, so this is the right time to rename if we're going to. And my take is let's just rename, make our lives easier. So next slide.
Gonna have a content warning on these next slides. If you are triggered by bike sheds, close your eyes.
So I wanted to make sure that we get this next slide, please, out of everyone's system before we actually formed a queue. Next slide. I also discovered AI LLMs for making Ietf slides. It's actually really fun. No, it's not bad, honestly.
That was creepy.
Yeah, I put in a creepy one. I forget what this is like a bike shed by MC Escher. No, that's different. So, thank you, everyone. I hope we all got that out of our system. Then, instead of signature, how about we just do unprompted signature and move on with our lives? Mark.
I'd like to make the suggestion that we name it something that is not the proper, how it gets there, which is signature, but what it provides to the user. And to me, the first word that comes to mind is unprompted is maybe a little vague. Is it just hidden? The hidden authentication scheme? Just putting it out there.
Yeah,
Not gonna
we
get stuck on it.
we were discussing that in the early days of this draft. So the reason I did unprompted, it was the previous name. The reason we didn't do hidden is that we didn't want people to think too much like, oh, this is a bad thing. Like hiding is bad. You don't what are you trying to hide, Mark? So that's why we kind of kept this.
Do you want a list?
Yes. I mean, I wanted to call this masked authentication, but everyone thought this was too on the nose.
Mass signatures, perhaps.
Yeah. And then Jonathan thought it would be really cool to call it client-initiated authentication, which has a really fun acronym collision. Justin.
Hi, Justin Richer. Naming things is hard.
Yeah.
And so first off, I just wanted to reiterate the point that the authorization signature isn't registered by anything. It's not in an RFC. Annabelle and I very explicitly dropped that from what became 9421 because of all sorts of problems with using message signatures in that space. That said, there are tons of implementations of the Cabbage draft that actually use this, including an entire banking system in Europe and Mastodon. If you want to have an idea of how widely a completely unattached ID can actually make it out there in the world when it wants to. Regardless, and this is in line with the thing that I wrote to the list. I agree with Mark that I think getting away from signature is a good idea because signature is how it does it. It's not providing a signature of the message. It's using a signature to do something. Tell me what about the thing that it's doing, not what it's made out of. And I think that with that, I don't have something in my pocket that's a perfect name for it, but I think that with that type of construction around it would be a lot clearer and a lot less ambiguous about kind of where it fits. These are brilliant, by the way.
Yeah,
Just as a side note.
we can just look at these for the next 20 minutes. Yeah,
Yeah, this is get ChatGPT to name the header and we'll be fine.
Right.
Oh, actually,
So-
hold on.
So
I had it explain the note well. It actually did a really good job. I'm surprised. But
we
anyway.
should talk. So before we progress to the queue, this is your last item? I hope.
I think so. I just
Okay,
got
just
distracted by making these. There wasn't.
Oh shit, that's
oh,
another
right.
issue.
Um,
Yeah.
Well,
So just
there's a quick last slide, but it's just a recap.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just setting expectations for the room, I do not think we are going to choose a name by consensus in the room today. Generally, I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Usually when we have this sort of thing happen, the working group gives some input for the editor to consider, and then it's an editorial decision tempered by the chair's wisdom and oversight, because sometimes editors choose some interesting names, don't they?
Who you're actually looking at this time?
Yes, it was a bunch of people in a fondue bar, I know.
Talk about the general termination of faulty operations frame in H2 or something else.
There were a couple of instances.
Oh.
Let's not dig up too much history. Yes. So let's get to the queue. Benjamin.
Hey, so I looked through the draft and old hobby horse. I couldn't find anything in the draft that actually says why we shouldn't just use HTTP basic authentication for this. And I know that we've discussed this at great length, and like you have a bunch of reasons for that, but none of those reasons I think are in the draft. And I actually think that like going through those reasons would help to figure out what to name it, because that would help to understand why it has to work the way it does.
Okay.
Well-
So that sounds like some editorial feedback
Yeah.
for you.
Well, thanks, Ben.
But also on the naming question, my comment on the list is that I think what makes this special is that it is a TLS channel binding, and I think that is the name.
Jonathan.
So other than client initiated auth, I really do like unprompted auth because that's the name of the draft at the top. It's great.
I mean, honestly, from this conversation, I'm leaning towards just unprompted.
Well, it's not just unprompted, like anything.
Well, no, the name of it will be unprompted authentication, but the string that we register in the HTTP auth scheme registry will be just unprompted.
Authorization
Jonathan.
All right.
Sorry. Peter.
Hi, it's Peter from DSEC. I'd like to suggest unsolicited or unsolicited SIG.
Oh,
Thanks.
yeah, okay. Okay.
All right. And I think so. We have some input. The three editors will discuss, and then we can go. Oh, you couldn't go through all of them one last time.
Well, you have about 30 seconds left. So.
Perfect. So what's left apart from this name is editorial work, which we'll do. We want to do a full pass because now that we've landed a bunch of PRs, that it'll be cleaner. And then I think we're kind of ready for working group last call probably, because like this was the last remaining issue. So I think that's it. Give us a chance to do the editorial work if you're planning on doing a full review, because we think it'll be better post-editorial work. Otherwise, we're terrible editors. But that's that.
Great.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. Can you let me?
You can take you want to share screen.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I highly encourage you to continue that development, David. Yes. Window. Sorry, one moment, folks. Why isn't it? Is it working? Try one more time. Accept. Choose content to share. Window. Ah.
Yeah, then you can choose which window.
Oh, okay. That's intuitive.
I'm not sure.
I don't know what to do now.
Just click the allow to share. And then Firefox. Oh yeah, okay, fine. It's working.
Okay. So next up, very briefly, the HTTP query method. This is a draft we've had open for a what? Yes. I'll.
You need to.
Right. So we have this document. It's been in the working group for a while, and it's a little bit stalled. We are going to have a side meeting on Thursday afternoon at 5 p.m. local time in one of the rooms nearby. There's an announcement on the mailing list. If you're interested in helping to move this forward and discuss the issues there, we're going to talk about it there. And Julian will be remote for that. So we're going to try and, as a little design team, I think some folks volunteered for a design team a while back. And if you forget if you did or not, come talk to me and we'll remind you. But I think, Mike, you were on that as well. And Martin, I think you were part of that as well, if I remember. You may or may not still be part of that design team. Yes, that's fine. It may have been just you, me, and Julian, but if other folks are interested, please come along. And we'll try and get that moving, because I know that there are some folks in the community who would like to be able to depend upon that work. So 5 p.m. on Thursday, which is not during a session, so it should be okay. And next up, then, we have resumable uploads. Let me stop sharing real quick. And that is, if I remember correctly.
Marius, do you want to control the slides from your end?
I've never done that, so maybe it's preferable if you do it.
Hold on, you're way too loud, unfortunately.
Is it better?
No. We're still far too loud.
I will rejoin, sorry.
Do we have controls over here? But no. The other speakers were fine, so I think hopefully he'll rearrange at his end. So in the meantime, we have some slides of bike sheds for you to look at. Is he trying to rejoin?
He's
Here he is.
Straight. Is it better?
A little bit less would be even better.
You can also just maybe talk quietly and it'll be fine. Anyway, do you want to? You can control your slides if you request the slide permission, and that way you can move ahead when you want to.
Is it the Ask Slides button?
The Ask Slides button, and then I'll grant it to you.
Okay. Okay, great. I hope you can see the slides. This is about resumable uploads. Maybe as a brief reminder, with resumable uploads, we try to provide a mechanism that clients can automatically resume uploads if they are interrupted. This means that the client can query the current upload state from the server and then just transfer the remaining data without having to retransmit all of the data that went before. We also already have a few implementations. Namely, we have server implementations in .NET and Go, and even one in Swift that I missed from putting on the slides. Sorry about that. We also have client implementations in JavaScript that work in Node and the browser. We have also one running on iOS. And there's also some additional tools for load testing, upload performance, and even a tool for checking the conformity to the current specification. But they're not all entirely published, as of course the draft is still evolving. But if you want to find out more or test a bit with the existing implementation, there's a GitHub repository where we collect information about all of those and how to get them running. We recently published the draft version 0.3. There's a few changes in there, although nothing too major. We added upload progress notifications via information and responses so that the client regularly gets updates on how much data has actually been saved. We explained the use of empty requests a bit because they might seem a bit odd, but they are actually useful in a few scenarios. So we clarified on when those should be used or how they should be supported. We also allowed the TOO status codes for offset retrieval and added a few more items to the security considerations. Thanks to everybody on bringing those up. This brings me to some of the stuff that's still open that we still have to figure out and discuss. One of those is the media type for patch requests. As we all know, patch requests must carry a content type that describes how the patch document should be applied to the resource. And for upload requests, where you just take the data and you append it to the upload resource, it might make sense in the first thought to use application octet stream for this, but this is not really applicable because it doesn't describe the patch document properly. And also that term is probably a lot overloaded, so we need to have something more specific. And one of the proposals is to use a new media type, something like application/partial upload, that specifically describes that the data included in the request actually is just a part of a bigger file. And then in our resumable uploads drop, we can then say, okay, you apply this patch document to the upload resource by appending it to the upload resource. Something similar has maybe been done before. In the media type registry, there's an entry from Adobe called application vendor Adobe partial upload. I haven't found more information on how it was actually used or if it was actually used, but people seem to have been experimenting with this before. So this would be a potential media type that we could use for resumable uploads. I have brought this to the media maintenance mailing list, and they seem to be supportive, or at least didn't have any big reasons against this. So I also wanted to bring this up to this working group. If there are any thoughts on this media type, pros or cons, yeah, let me know if there's any comments about this. If not, then we can also move on to the next point. And that is about upload limits. So most servers usually put some limits on the uploads, like how much data you can upload in total, how much data can be included in a single request, also how long an upload can take. This is especially interesting with resumable uploads because they are split across multiple requests. So in theory, you could even resume them after a day or something. And maybe in the future, there might also be limits on the number of concurrent upload requests that go to one resource. But this is still pretty much hypothetical talk because we don't really want to talk about parallelized uploads right now. But the general gist is that there are some limits that apply to upload resources, and it would be really handy if we had a way that clients can discover those in a standardized way. And the current draft doesn't really address this. It just says or it assumes that the client knows these by heart or some out of bounds method, but it would be handy if we had some way to put them into the standard. And so one of the potential ideas is that the server announces those limits to the client whenever an upload is created or whenever the client queries the upload state. So there's two possible ways. We could have different header fields that say, okay, for example, the upload size limit is about 1 GB, and the upload expires at this timestamp. And then you could have additional headers that specify the minimum or the maximum size that can be included in an individual request. These are options. Of course, upload expire might also be replaced by another header. I think we have a sunset header that might be something similar. But those are one options. Another option would be to have like one upload limit header, but as a dictionary, so you have like multiple entries in there. This makes it nice because we have one header, but of course this requires us to define a new registry, which might be a bit too much. Yes, so those are two options. Are there any comments on those?
Yeah, Mary, it's Mark. I first of all, I would not recommend using sunset there. That has specific semantics that aren't really applicable here, and so that'd be overloading those semantics. So we generally try not to do that. Minting your own header is fine. But of these options, personally, I'd prefer option 2. I think it's more compact, and because all these things are closely related, it makes sense to put them in one field, unless for some reason, if you're sending it a lot and you get compression efficiency out of it in H2 or H3, maybe there's an argument for splitting it up, but I don't think that's going to be the case. It does not necessarily imply that you need a registry of upload limits. You can do something like define the header in your RFC, and then say, if you want to add a new attribute here, effectively a new property, you need to update this RFC. And so that's a kind of a lower impact way to do that. If you don't really think that this probably isn't going to be extended by random implementers, I'm assuming, or users. It's probably only if the protocol evolves. And so that might be a more appropriate approach here. Lucas.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think we're probably looking for your input the most out of this, so you beat me to it. I think I posted a question on the issue or the PR. Some of this seems a bit similar to the rate limit headers that were going on in HTTP API, and I know that had some difficulties and challenges for their own reasons. I just want to make sure we weren't repeating any of those kinds of things. But really, for my own sake, I wanted to make sure that this idea is something that the working group would like or not object to. So if anyone thinks this isn't something we should do, I'd really appreciate that being mentioned now or on the issue itself.
So I was speaking to how you spelled it, not whether you should spell it. It sounds like you want advice on that as well.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yaroslav Rosomahom. I wonder, upload expires is specified in Unix timestamp. It doesn't seem to be consistent with regular date time notation in HTTP headers. Is there a reason why we want to use Unix timestamp here instead? Or maybe a better option would be relative time, how much client has to upload, rather than giving absolute value?
So I'll respond to that. So there's been a lot of discussion about that, and this is not because you're not using a structured field there, I notice, but if it were a structured field, it would look a little bit similar to that, and that's where we've ended up in that discussion. I can point you to a very long discussion about why this is the case if you like.
Yeah. So I got in line to say I would very much prefer that this not use absolute times. I think wherever possible, we should avoid using absolute times in protocols, because there are always two clocks in a protocol and they never agree. Yeah. And it's a little easier if you have delta time. Yeah. It'll also be a bit smaller and easier to put on the wire. And it also means potentially that you end up with this in a better state with respect to having a static expression of what your policy is. You just say, this is the policy. I keep it around for 30 seconds or 2 minutes or what have you. And you've always produced the same answer, which compresses really well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much about this. I think we can integrate those points.
Sorry, just to be explicit, I didn't hear any pushback on whether they should be done or not. It sounds like there's general, like it's fine. Yeah.
All right, doesn't seem like there's any pushback. Then I will continue with the next point. This is about, sorry.
If I may, these need to be all optional, I take it. That wasn't really covered in the thing, because there are aspects of this that I think some servers may not have a policy, or they may not wish to express a policy. And so if all of them are optional, this is fine.
Yeah. It's good to make those assumptions explicit. Yeah.
And sorry, I should have been clearer on my point. One of the questions is this something that should be done solely for resumable uploads, or any kind of upload to over HTTP?
So the entire upload size limit might be something more general, where you could say, okay, what is the entire limit that a single request can carry? But the other ones, especially when you're talking about appending to an upload, like the minimum and maximum size that you can append, I think those are very specific for resumable uploads. The upload expiration thing, you could make it into a bit more general thing. You're like saying, okay, what's the lifetime of a resource? But I think there have been other attempts in this, and those haven't been very successful. So I'm not sure if moving this into a more general approach is actually helpful here.
Yeah, I just want to avoid us trying to do the right thing and doing it wrong, and then regretting it when it comes to working group last call or something. So I don't think we need any more time right here, but those are the kind of things I want to see answered really before we merge this, just to avoid churn. Cheers, Marius.
Thank you. All right, then next point might be a pretty simple question, but it has been one that's been bugging me a bit. So the RFC for patch request says that the patch document that is included in the request must be applied atomically and not partially. This makes sense if you're thinking, for example, about a JSON API, where you supply a JSON patch document and you want to have this entire document applied and not just some state of it. With resumable uploads, this brings us into a bit of an odd state, because with resumable uploads, we explicitly provide support for applying partial changes, in a sense that, for example, if you transmit 10 gigabytes, or you want to transmit 10 gigabytes in a patch request, but it gets aborted halfway through, you can still save the first 5 gigabytes without any issues, and then the client can just query the state of the upload and then resume. So in this case, for us, it's totally fine, or for the use of resumable uploads, it's totally fine to have the patch document applied partially, like only the first part of it. But this might not really work with the language that is in the RFC for patch requests. And I just want to bring this up now before it comes in like a working group loss call, that we might be doing stuff that's not compatible with patch. Are there any comments about this?
Lucas. Oh, we didn't. Sorry. So I think the strictly correct way to do this would be to update the patch RFC, because that wasn't envisioned. But I don't think that's necessary here. I think you just do a little bit of sleight of hand with language about what the definition of complete is for this particular media type, and that should be fine. I don't think anything more than that's necessary personally. Martin?
Yeah, I might even go further than Mark and say, if you read this carefully, it basically says that any change that's in flight, you should never see part of that change if you're querying that resource from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the case of an aborted upload that is then continued, it might take a very long time for that to reach the point where the state of the resource flips, but it will flip atomically at the time that you finish uploading it. And that should be relatively straightforward for and within the bounds of the definition in the patch RFC. So I'm okay with these both existing and coexisting.
I'm okay with it too. I don't think you're quite correct because remember we're talking about a separate patch resource now, and we're updating its state, and then when it flips, that updates the true resource. So from a strict semantic standpoint, that's not quite true. But I think in spirit, we're
I
aligned
think in
here.
spirit it's okay.
Yeah.
It might be worth putting some language around this in the document, saying
Mhm.
this is how we think about it, and this is the expectation that we have around how resources will behave when interacted with in this way. And I think that'll help.
And it might be even worth raising a technical errata against patch to say that subject to the semantics of the upload media type is the intention of that requirement.
Right.
All right, thank you very much. We will definitely incorporate this. One of the last points that I would like to bring up today is about the use of content coding with resumable uploads. So for example, let's assume that we want to upload a big JSON file, and because JSON is pretty much text, you can compress it pretty well with gzip. So you start an upload and you say content type is application JSON, but you also use content encoding gzip to compress it pretty nicely. And then you start doing your upload, and maybe in the middle it gets interrupted, and so you want to resume it. But now if you resume it, how do you handle the content encoding? Do you want to use in the patch request, do you still want to use content encoding gzip, or do you want to use something like content encoding identity, or omit it entirely? The idea might be that you still target the same representation that you did when you started the upload. But then again, if you just cut off a gzip stream in the middle, then the remaining part might not be like a valid gzip format itself because you don't have the header. But in the end, you're still trying to modify the same representation. So this might be falling on my short understanding of representations, but is there any feedback on how content encoding should be handled when resuming uploads?
So I think, and other people can come up and correct me if I'm wrong, even though we often do produce it on the fly, content encoding is technically saying this resource is gzipped JSON. So if you've uploaded half of it, you're halfway through the gzipped thing. When you go to resume it, you are continuing the gzipped thing and the gzipped JSON. You are not gzipping a portion of the JSON. Does that make sense? So you have to gzip it and then upload pieces of that. And so in the second one, that's not content encoding gzip because you have not gzipped the partial upload, which is your media type there.
Okay. So it would be more appropriate to omit the content encoding header.
Yeah. So the way to think about this is that the representation that you're sharing in the second one is just the bytes of the thing that you tried to complete previously, and so there's no content coding there. There was content coding on the original one, but there was no content coding on the second one, and that will work. That does also suggest the option that you can put content coding on the patch in addition to the content coding that you had on the original, and its totals all the way down. But I would not do that. Yeah.
Should we specify
No need to specify you can't. Just say, like, if you do it, it will have these unintended consequences.
Right. This is still one of those here be dragons kind of situations.
Well, I think it's pretty well defined. Is that when you receive this request, the content needs to be decompressed or processed using the content coder the decoder for the coding type before you do anything. And in the context of continuing an upload, you're just continuing to add to the bytes of the original. But this is gross. They just don't.
Lucas, go ahead.
I think
Oh, sorry.
we have a solution to detecting that grossness. If like you try to do that and you did the encoding of the patch wrong, and you piece together the object badly, and you would then check the digest of the object you uploaded, and it would fail. So at least you could detect this thing. But we shouldn't be doing it. But there are ways to detect if you held it wrong. This could happen for like, I don't know, just bogus clients out there that do the wrong thing, and at least if they get a strong signal back, which suggests to me that the ability to check digests of these things is useful, but that's a separate issue and a separate PR.
Just as an aside, this kind of makes me wonder, and I haven't thought it through fully, but you know, we have this thing where we're kind of creating a new resource effectively, and maybe we need to send some instructions about how that resource is created, regarding things like, oh, okay, you should probably create an unencoded version of this resource, or you know, conversely, if I upload a plain text, you know, maybe you should, you know, be able to configure that it should be content coded. I don't know. Something to think about, maybe. That's almost like a remote configuration protocol, though. I mean, how far do you go with that?
All right, thank you very much for the feedback. That's very helpful and will be incorporated. This also brings me to my last slide. There are still a few other open issues, but most of them should be easy to close. We have been discussing some of those. There's some PRs open for some of those. So I hope that we'll be finishing this up not too late into the future, and then maybe can move this across the finish line in the next coming time. But yeah, thank you very much for all of the feedback, and I wish you a great remaining day.
Thank you, Marius. So that's our last item for today. As we said, we're going to meet again on. Oh wait, David Skenazy is in queue. David,
Just really quickly, not on this draft, but on the topic of retiring the old signature HTTP scheme, I was thinking, should we mark it in the IANA registry as deprecated so that someone doesn't step on this landmine next? I was just going to put in a request, but it's Ietf review.
Yeah.
So I was thinking I could just add that to the references of the new draft with a reference to the old one. You don't need to reference yourself. What do you think? I can also just, yes, for this registry you do. I know. So that's why I was like, the only way to do it would be to add it to our INX section of like, by the way, there's also this thing explaining the history, or we could just say, we don't care.
all right. Let's have it. We can have a chat about that. Okay. All right. So Friday, we'll talk again. I want to congratulate everyone. We've managed our time very well today. We're just on time. We have 2 extra minutes.
And for people who are making slides for Friday, you can choose to include many pictures that are AI generated or not. I'm not sure what feelings I have about that, but I have feelings.
There are
Thank you.
Did not know I was going to be exposed to so many bike chats.
Did you get the picture out of that? Yeah, unzip the zip.
Thank you for your service. You're very kind. I found